A company that cannot survive, change does not deserve to survive. Those were the words of George Eastman, the man who founded Kodak in 1888 and revolutionized photography. Ironically, his own company would die because it refused to change. You see, Kodak's collapse has impacted how we understand innovation, disruption, and the deadly cost of protecting short-term profits over long-term survival. Things that still impact businesses today. Kodak was so dominant that Kodak moment became part of the English language. The company employed 145,000 people and controlled 90% of film sales in America. Now, many of you already know that Kodak went bankrupt. However, there's a good chance you're underestimating just how deliberately Kodak killed its own future. I mean, Kodak invented the digital camera in 1975, then buried the technology for 25 years to protect film profits. It just goes to show that they knew very early on that digital photography would destroy their business, and they chose quarterly earnings over survival. From inventing the camera that would kill them to watching the iPhone finish them off, Kodak is undeniably one of the greatest self-destructions in business history. Now, our story begins with George Eastman. He was a man of modest origins. However, he was brilliantly innovative and understood what customers wanted before they knew themselves. He was born in 1854 in Waterville, New York, to a farming family. His father died when George was young, forcing him to drop out of school at age 14 to support his mother and sisters. He worked as a bank clerk, earning $15 per week, a boring job that barely paid enough to survive. But George had a hobby that would change his life: photography. In the 1870s, photography was a nightmare. Cameras were massive wooden boxers requiring glass plates coated in toxic chemicals. Taking a single photo required carrying 50 pounds of equipment. Developing photos required a darkroom and dangerous chemicals. Photography was only for professionals or wealthy hobbyists. Life for George would have remained ordinary except he had a vision that seemed impossible at the time. You see, in 1877, George became obsessed with the question: what if photography was simple enough that anyone could do it? He spent 3 years experimenting in his mother's kitchen, developing a dry photographic plate that didn't require messy chemicals. In 1880, he patented his invention and founded the Eastman Dry Plate Company. But George wasn't satisfied. Dry plates were better than wet plates, but they were still complicated. George wanted to eliminate the plate entirely. In 1884, he invented roll film, a flexible strip that could be loaded into cameras, exposed to light, and processed later. This was revolutionary. Photography could finally be portable. Now, in this photography world, George's breakthrough came in 1888 when he launched the Kodak camera. It was small, portable, preloaded with 100 exposures of roll film, and cost $25, equivalent to $800 today. The camera came with a revolutionary business model. You press the button, we do the rest. Customers took photos, then mailed the entire camera back to Kodak. Kodak developed the film, printed the photos, reloaded the camera with fresh film, and mailed everything back. Photography became effortless. The Kodak camera was an instant success. By 1900, Kodak had sold over 100,000 cameras and dominated American photography. George Eastman had democratized an entire industry, but more importantly, he created the razor-and blades business model: sell cameras cheap, make fortunes on film, and developing services. By the 1930s, Kodak was a juggernaut. The company controlled 90% of film sales in America and 85% of camera sales. Kodak film was the standard worldwide. During World War II, Kodak supplied the U.S. military with reconnaissance film and cameras. By the 1960s, Kodak employed over 60,000 people and was one of the most admired companies in America. The 1970s were Kodak's golden age. Revenue hit $10 billion annually. Kodak moments became part of American culture: birthdays, weddings, graduations, all captured on Kodak film. The company's research labs in Rochester, New York, were among the best in the world, employing thousands of scientists and engineers. Kodak seemed invincible, a perpetual money machine built on film and chemistry. But here's where Kodak's story takes a dark turn. You see, in 1975, a 24-year-old Kodak engineer named Steven Sasson built something that would eventually destroy his employer. Sasson created the world's first digital camera. It was a toaster-sized prototype that captured black and white images at 0.01 megapixels and stored them on a cassette tape. The image quality was terrible, but it worked. Sasson demonstrated it to Kodak executives, excited about the possibilities. Their response: "That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it." Kodak buried the invention. Why? Because digital photography threatened Kodak's film business, which generated 70% of profits. If people stopped buying film, Kodak's entire business model collapsed. So Kodak management made a calculated decision: suppress digital photography as long as possible and milk film profits until someone else forced change. This decision haunted Kodak for the next 30 years. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Kodak continued improving Sasson's digital camera technology internally, but refused to commercialize it aggressively. Meanwhile, competitors saw the opportunity. Sony launched the first consumer digital camera in 1981. Canon, Nikon, and Fujifilm followed. By the 1990s, digital cameras were improving rapidly, and prices were dropping. Kodak finally released consumer digital cameras in the mid-1990s, but half-heartedly. The company was terrified of cannibalizing film sales. Kodak's strategy was schizophrenic: sell digital cameras but continue pushing film. It didn't work. Customers who bought digital cameras stopped buying film, exactly as Kodak feared. By 2000, Kodak faced an existential crisis. Digital camera sales were exploding, and film sales were collapsing. Kodak's stock peaked at $94 per share in 1997, valuing the company at $31 billion. But by 2000, revenue was declining, and the stock was falling. Kodak's leadership panicked and made desperate moves. They invested billions in trying to build a digital photography ecosystem: online photo sharing, digital printing kiosks in stores, and even a partnership with AOL. But it was too little, too late. Kodak had waited 25 years to embrace digital seriously, and competitors had already won. Then in 2007, something happened that Kodak never anticipated. Apple launched the iPhone. The iPhone wasn't marketed as a camera, but it had a 2-megapixel camera built in. Suddenly, everyone carried a camera in their pocket. Within 2 years, the iPhone camera improved to 5 megapixels, then 8, then 12. The quality was good enough for casual photography, which was 90% of Kodak's market. And the iPhone did something even more devastating. It made sharing photos instant. You took a photo and immediately texted it, posted it on Facebook, or uploaded it to Instagram. Kodak's entire business model, built on developing and printing photos weeks later, became obsolete overnight. Kodak's collapse accelerated horrifically. In 2003, Kodak employed 63,000 people. Kodak emerged from bankruptcy in 2013 as a tiny shadow of itself, focused on commercial printing. The consumer photography business, the business George Eastman created, was abandoned entirely. Today, Kodak employs around 4,500 people, down from 145,000 at its peak. The company is worth approximately $500 million, a fraction of its $31 billion peak valuation. Rochester, New York, the city Kodak built, never recovered. Thousands of engineers, chemists, and factory workers lost careers. Entire neighborhoods emptied as Kodak collapsed. So, what killed Kodak? I think it's one thing above all: greed disguised as prudence. Kodak's leadership wasn't stupid. They saw digital photography coming in 1975. They knew it would replace film, but they made a choice: protect today's profits instead of building tomorrow's business. This is called the Innovators' dilemma. But at Kodak, it was simpler than that. It was greed. Executives were paid based on quarterly earnings and stock price. Film was incredibly profitable, with gross margins exceeding 60%. Digital cameras had margins of 10 to 15%. So every year, executives chose film over digital because it made their bonuses bigger. They rationalized this by telling themselves digital was years away and they had time to transition. But they never actually transitioned because it always hurt short-term numbers. Kodak also suffered from arrogance. For 100 years, Kodak had been the smartest company in imaging. Their labs invented xerography, which became the digital camera, the inkjet printer, and dozens of other technologies. Kodak executives believed they were smarter than everyone else and could control the pace of change. They thought customers would keep buying film as long as Kodak wanted to sell it. They were wrong. Markets don't care about your business model. Customers choose what's better, not what's more profitable for you. Another factor was denial. By the mid-2000s, even as digital cameras destroyed film sales, Kodak leadership insisted the transition would be slow and manageable. They predicted people would still want prints, so Kodak invested billions in printing kiosks. But smartphones made printing obsolete too. Photos lived on screens, not walls. Kodak's entire framework was wrong, but they couldn't see it because accepting reality meant admitting their company was dying. But we have to ask ourselves, could Kodak have survived? Yes, absolutely. If Kodak had aggressively commercialized digital cameras in the 1980s, they could have dominated digital photography the way they dominated film. They had the technology, the brand, the distribution, and the cash. If you made it this far, leave a camera emoji in the comments. And please subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.